Shah is a kind of magic word with the Persian people. This was said by Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who became the Shah of Iran on September 19, 1941. He started out as a strong leader but created controversy when Mohammad Mossadegh was elected as Prime Minister of Iran. Mossadegh nationalized Iran's oil, which allowed profits to stay in Iran instead of abroad. They had different ruling styles, and that caused anger in Iran. The U.S. government and CIA stepped in and put the Coup 53 into action. At first, the Coup 53 was unsuccessful, and Shah Pahlavi had to flee the country. But in 1953, the Coup 53 became successful, thereby overthrowing Mossadegh, and the Shah came back to Iran. The Shah quickly became an autocrat ruler, but was also the U.S. puppet. The U.S. was willing to fund Iran's industries as long as the Shah did exactly what the U.S. said. Although Shah Pahlavi was a strong leader who brought reform to Iran, his dictatorship caused revolution in Iran, leaving a legacy of violence, which led to the U.S. hostage crisis. Mohammad Reza Pahlavi made reforms in Iran politically by changing Iran's old policies and replacing them with his own policies, which also led to the Iranian Revolution of 1979. The Shah brought political reform by leading as an autocrat or dictator. The Shah also opposed the prime minister because he wanted all of the power to himself. Pahlavi also relied on his manipulation of people instead of his leadership skills to rule Iran. One of his reforms was a secret police called Savak. The Savak was used to torture and to install fear in the people who spoke out against the Shah, which caused corruption in Iran. The Shah had a special relationship with the U.S. The U.S. put significant amounts of money into Iran's industries, including its oil industry, but the U.S. did not fund Iran without a price of its own. The Shah quickly became a U.S. puppet. The Shah succumbed to the U.S.'s agenda when it came to trade. The U.S. also helped fund and run Coup 53. When Mohammad Mossadegh was elected as Prime Minister of Iran, the CIA set up Coup 53. The CIA removed Mossadegh from power. Coup 53 was put into action in 1950, but it took 3 years to successfully exile Mossadegh. So it was out with Mossadegh and in with Shah Pahlavi. Coup 53 highly angered the people of Iran because Mossadegh was an elected leader that the Iranians approved of. Also, Iranians did not believe that the Shah was a strict and pure Shia, and his modernizations were too advanced for the conservative Iran. They wanted only economic reforms and for the leader to be a strict Shia. The Shah did not meet those standards for Iranians. The people of Iran were also tired of being tortured and constantly looking over their shoulders due to the Savak. So there was one thing to do. Iranians had to revolt and create a revolution and force the exile of the Shah.
Shah brought economic change via industrialization and unequal wealth, which also led to the Iranian Revolution in 1979. Shah Pahlavi changed the economy in Iran through industrialization and oil industry growth, which aided the start of the revolution. Shah Pahlavi allowed foreign influence into Iran's economy. He industrialized it by creating new rails, air industries, dams, irrigation systems, and he put money towards the industrialization and land reform. Pahlavi liked doing business with the U.S. and came up with a 7-year plan for economic change. With the help of the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, he funded the road-building process, constructing 1,500 miles of roads and highways to make transportation easier for Iran. There was also a lot of oil industrialization in Iran at the time. Reza Pahlavi created controversy by creating unequal wealth in Iran. The Anglo-Iranian Oil Company negotiated with Pahlavi and they came to an agreement on terms for nationalization of their oil industry. But the British would only invest in Iran's oil companies for a portion of their profits. Iran also relied on the U.S. for help for funding their oil industry. President Ford tried to control the prices of oil, and Pahlavi was a U.S. puppet, so he did his best to keep the prices low for America, but that hurt Iran's economy. Ford pressured the Shah to use his OPEC influence to benefit the U.S. OPEC stands for Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries. OPEC had absolute power over the oil prices and production levels. All of these economic changes soon led to revolution. The oil business created unequal wealth where the money gap was getting much bigger and the poor Iranians were very unhappy. Iran's government could not keep up with the equal distribution of wealth, so this started riots from the poor and caused a revolution. There was also a start of oil control in Iran. After a lot of struggles with the British, the government funds were cut off and the oil nationalization came to a halt. This caused a major drop in Iran's economy and made the country go through a time with huge inflation because Iran lost all the funds they had already put towards the nationalization of their oil industry. Lastly, the Shah brought social reform via the White Revolution, which also led to the Iranian Revolution in 1979. The Shah's social reforms and his political reforms were similar in a sense that they both gave women rights and freedoms that they weren't allowed before. The Shah also created highways, roads, hospitals, schools, and airports. Although these very much needed reforms were made, the government was still corrupt and people were still starving and unemployed. Savak was a secret police that the Shah used to eliminate his opponents and remove all secular opposition.
First, the Shah uses Savak to unearth political opposition of all types. Activists are imprisoned, tortured, and executed.
The Shah's legacy will live on through the people who will remember the Shah's Savak and the treatment they received from the secret police.
Although Shah Reza Pahlavi brought political, social, and economic reform to Iran, these changes caused a revolution, leaving a legacy of violence which led to the U.S. hostage crisis. Because of these changes, the Iranian people felt that the Shah was too Western and too modern for Iran. The Iranians wanted a more religiously strict leader to rule their country, and they felt that the Shah Reza Pahlavi wasn't a dedicated enough Shiite for Iran. The revolution took place because the people were revolting against Pahlavi's modern ways and Western ways. When the Iranian people revolted against the Shah, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini was put into power. On June 6, 1963, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini was arrested and exiled by the Shah, which in turn created riots. The Shah left Iran in January 1979 because the Iranian people were demanding the return of Khomeini as their leader. Not long after, Khomeini came back into power on February 1st of 1979. Khomeini became Iran's theocratic leader for life. The Iranian people believed that Khomeini was a stronger leader who was more loyal to his religion. The way that the Iranians revolted was through the U.S. Embassy hostage crisis. Reza Pahlavi had gotten ill with lymphatic cancer, and he went to the United States for medical treatment. With the people of Iran already unhappy with the choices that Pahlavi made while ruling, this made them even more angry that he left their country to seek medical help. As a result, a group of college student Iranian rebel nationalists seized the U.S. Embassy and took 66 American people hostage. Hostages were forced to sit facing a corner all day, every day, with their hands tied to their feet. The angry Iranian mob refused to release the hostages until America returned the Shah Reza Pahlavi back to Iran, along with billions of dollars that the rebel nationalists claimed the Shah Reza Pahlavi had robbed of the Iranian people. The Iranians wanted the Shah to be put on trial for his exile. The President of the United States during this time, Jimmy Carter, attempted to rescue the hostages. This rescue attempt was known as Operation Eagle Claw. The operation failed, embarrassing America and costing Jimmy Carter to lose his second-term election. Not until the day Ronald Reagan was elected President of the United States were the hostages released. After being held captive for 444 days, the hostages were rescued on January 21, 1981. Iran today depends mostly on its oil industry for its money, but because of the unpredictable pattern of oil production, Iran has an unstable economy. Because the economy is so poorly run, the revenue from the oil is still not evenly distributed. Another way that the Shah Reza Pahlavi affects the world today is that America no longer has an embassy in Iran. America refuses to trade or do any business with Iran. Thanks to the Shah, there will always be tension between the United States and Iran. Clearly, the Shah Reza Pahlavi left a legacy of violence by acting as a strong leader who brought reform to Iran, leading as a dictator which caused a revolution in Iran, and bringing on the U.S. Embassy hostage crisis through his decisions while ruling. It is no wonder that Pahlavi said, "Let me tell you quite bluntly that this king business has given me, personally, nothing but headaches."